During the summer of 2019, I was traveling solo through small historic towns, filming content for my travel blog. I was 26, had decent camera equipment, and thought I'd seen every kind of tourist trap America had to offer. That weekend, I ended up in this tiny town in the Midwest with a Victorian mansion-turned-museum on the outskirts. They advertised evening tours every hour until 8 p.m., so I booked the 7 o'clock slot, figuring the golden hour light would be perfect for shots. When I showed up, I was the only person there. The guide, a woman around 50 in a severe black dress, introduced herself as Dorothy and led me inside with just a flashlight. The mansion was dimly lit, half the rooms in shadow, and she explained they were having electrical issues. She moved fast, keys on her belt jingling once in a while, voice low and steady as she walked me through the foyer and past a velvet rope into the front parlor. She pointed out a family portrait, named Dates Without Looking, and tapped a glass dome over a pocket watch. Original to the house, she said. I kept my camera working on auto ISO and stayed polite because I've learned docents either love you or hate you if you film. And I needed the footage. The weird thing, little thing, was how she kept glancing at my gear bag like she was checking the brand or the zippers or something. Not curious, more accounting for it. We did the dining room with the long table and the heavy chairs, then a music room with a busted upright, and the air had that hot dust smell you get when old wires kick on. We're getting a grant for the system, she said, almost apologizing. I told her it looked great on camera, and she smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes, like someone practicing friendly. As we hit the back stairs, she stopped and said, "Do you hear that?" I said no, and she waved it off as the compressor. On the second floor, she brought me into a study with a massive desk covered in old ledger books, a brass inkwell drilled into a blotter, and neat stacks of paper tied with string. She gave me the quick spiel about the original owner being a lawyer who did something for the railroad, then looked at the hallway and winced. "Shoot, forgot to turn on the lights in the next room," she said. "Breaker box is finicky. 2 minutes." She asked me to wait there, look around, don't touch the desk. I said sure, set my tripod near the bookshelf, and started shooting the spines for B-roll. 5 minutes passed, then 10. The house settled, little clicks, a long sigh in the vents. And Dorothy didn't come back. I called out her name, felt dumb for how loud it sounded, and got nothing but a plank popping somewhere down the hall. I stuck my head into the corridor. My light pool barely reached the next doorway. The bulbs above me were dead. I waited another minute, and then told myself not to be weird. She probably got held up with some switch or whatever. I walked toward the stairs to find her. Halfway down, I noticed the glow from the entry had disappeared. On the main floor, the lobby lamps were off, the little neon open in the vestibule dark. I tried the front door and it turned an inch, then thunked against something heavy. When I put my shoulder into it, I felt a deadbolt. Outside. "Hey," I called, and that came out way too hopeful. No answer. I rattled the handle a couple more times, even though that never does anything. It didn't. I took out my phone. No bars. Airplane mode off/on, nothing. The stone walls felt like being inside a bank vault. I moved fast, checking the side rooms for another exit. The windows all had iron bars bolted right through the masonry. In the coat room, there was a narrow window with a crank that didn't budge, and the bars were so close together I wouldn't have fit my forearm through. Back by the gift counter, the register was covered, a donation jar empty, a half-drunk bottle of water with a ring under it. The office door behind the counter was locked. A sign said, "Staff only," in laminated letters. Now, before I explain what I did next, you need to understand I'm not the kick-a-door guy. I do checklists. So I retraced. Front door, side door near the kitchen, pantry emergency exit sign that was just a sticker, nothing. I said Dorothy's name again, and the house swallowed it. I decided to head back upstairs because height meant sight lines and maybe a window latch I'd missed. On my way past a display case, I noticed the padlock wasn't snapped shut, just hanging there. That felt like a loose thread I didn't have time to pull. At the base of the rear stairs, I heard it. Footsteps above me, slow, heel to toe, then a pause. I froze, and for a second I was stupidly happy. Finally, Dorothy. I stepped to the side so I wasn't framed in the stairwell, because that's just common sense, and looked up the rail. Nothing but a slice of landing. "Dorothy?" I said, lighter this time. The footsteps resumed, crossing the landing, and I caught a shadow just before it vanished. I went up 3 steps, then 3 more. Then I stopped because I noticed my tripod wasn't where I'd left it in the study. The books were the same, the desk the same, but the tripod was gone. I glanced down the hall toward the bedrooms, dark, doors open like mouths, and heard a soft set-down thunk, like aluminum legs on wood, somewhere out of sight. "Hello?" I tried one more, not yelling, just putting sound out to see what bounced back. Nothing did. I backed into the study, keeping the hall in view. My phone camera was on wide just in case. Dumb plan, but it made me feel less blind. That's when a voice floated from upstairs, bright as a sales pitch. "There you are," Dorothy called, cheerful like a radio ad. I brought the key to the back door. Every hair on my neck went up because the tone wasn't right, too sweet, too rehearsed, like when someone jokes they've got a surprise and you realize you're the punchline. She said my name next, like we were old friends. I stayed where I was, hand on the edge of the desk, and watched the doorway with my breath held. I didn't answer. I ducked behind the heavy curtains in the front parlor and pressed my shoulder to the wall, leaving a 2-finger gap where the fabric didn't quite meet, and I could see the stair rail and the glow moving down it. Dorothy came slow, flashlight low, the beam cutting across chair legs and the velvet rope stanchions, and she kept saying my name like we were playing hide and seek, bright and sing-song, and in her other hand something metallic flashed, flat, hooked at one end, not a key, more like a short crowbar or the pry tool maintenance guys carry. She checked behind the settee, opened the little closet with the vacuum, swung the light into the alcove where the umbrella stand was, and my throat felt tight from not coughing because the dust was bad in that curtain, but I didn't move, didn't breathe. She got within maybe 3 feet of the drape, and I saw the flashlight wash over the hem and pause, like she was listening, like she was counting the beats of the room. She went past to the music room, drawers sliding, a door creaking, and I heard her mutter, not words, just the tone people use when they're annoyed something's not where they left it. I let another 10 seconds go, 10 slow counts, and peeled out sideways, weight on my toes so the floor wouldn't pop. The hall to the service area was empty. I kept the wall on my left, stepped around the rope posts, and moved through that narrow doorway that went to the butler's pantry. The service entrance was at the end, a metal fire door with push hardware. It didn't budge. To the right was a key rack screwed to a board with little paper tags on hooks. Kitchen, workshop, boiler, office. I took 2 keys close to the same brass color as the push bar. First one did nothing, second one turned with a stiff click you feel in your wrist, and I eased the bar and caught the door before it bounced. Cool air hit, and the back courtyard was just a rectangle of cracked concrete and a trash bin with a padlock, and a low fence I could get a knee over. Behind me a floorboard knocked twice, slow, like a test, and the flashlight glow licked the pantry doorway. I didn't look back. I stepped onto the trash bin lid, swung a leg, scraped my shin on the top rail, dropped to the alley, and ran. I ran 3 blocks, cut a corner at a mailbox, and found a coffee shop with the lights on and 2 baristas wiping down the counter. And I went straight to the register and said, "Call the police now, please." Probably louder than I thought. The guy picked up the phone. The girl locked the door without being told, and I gave the address and said a woman with a flashlight and a crowbar had locked me in the museum. And while I was talking, I realized my hands were shaking because the lid on my camera bag rattled against the zipper pull. The cop car rolled up fast, 2 officers, and one asked if I needed EMTs. I said no, just get her out of there. And the other started asking me basics: name, phone, why I was inside after hours. I showed them my Eventbrite receipt, the timestamp, and the 7 p.m. museum tour confirmation on my screen. But he frowned and said, "They close at 5. They drove to the mansion with me following in the back, not cuffed or anything, just riding. And when we pulled up, the front looked normal, porch light glowing, door shut, a little red LED blinking near the handle. The officer tried the door and the alarm panel chirped. Clean system, active code required. He circled to the back gate. Locked. The side windows were dark. No movement, no voice, nothing. They called a number printed on the donation sign. A man answered and said he was the board president, and no evening tours, never had them. And the only docent scheduled today left at 5 on the dot. He could meet us in 15. Next morning, detectives found out Dorothy Hamilton had been fired 2 months back for lifting small things from the cases and selling them. Pins, a watch fob, a stack of postcards, and she'd kept copies of the keys, also knew the alarm schedule and how to arm it from inside. They said she'd been luring tourists for a week maybe. Not many because the town was slow, but enough that someone finally noticed a pattern. They tracked me down fast because I'd filmed B-roll across the street at a cafe, and their camera had me going in and out, clear shots of the time. They picked her up 3 days later when she came back after closing with a tote bag and the same black dress. And in the tote was a pry bar, a flashlight, duct tape, and 2 phones. I packed up, left town the day after I gave my statement, and I never finished that blog post. I think about how ordinary it all looked, and how easy it was to say yes to a tour that fit my schedule, and I don't have a big lesson except this. If the hours don't match, leave. And if a voice sounds wrong, trust that, because a locked door isn't just a mistake when someone stands on the other side holding the key. So when I was 11, this really creepy thing happened to me at a sporting goods store. My name's Ethan, and I'm pretty tall for my age, like almost 5 feet, so people usually think I'm 13 or 14 instead of 11, which I don't mind except when adults start talking to me like I should know everything already. I've got red hair and freckles, second of 4 kids, and every Sunday my dad takes me and my younger sister Emma shopping while mom stays home with the little ones because it's the only day dad's off. Last Sunday we went to this big sports store because I needed a new baseball glove for my school team, and Emma needed running shoes for track. Dad let us split up since the store was huge. He took Emma to the shoe section and told me I could go to the baseball section alone since I'm old enough, and he trusts me. The glove displays were way in the back corner by the batting nets, stacked on these metal hooks, and I was trying on different ones, checking the pocket and how the webbing felt. That's when this woman, maybe 40, came up and asked if I needed help choosing. I said I was fine on my own, just trying to see which one closed right. But she didn't go away. She stood there with this weird smile that didn't reach her eyes, commenting on every glove I picked up like she was my coach or something. "That one's too stiff for you," and "Are you right-handed or left-handed?" And then she started firing questions, really fast. "What school do you go to? What team? Who's your coach? What's your name? Where do you live? Do you practice after school or weekends?" I gave short answers because my dad always says not to share personal stuff with strangers. So I said things like 5th grade and our school team, and I'm just looking. Thanks. She kept nodding like we were friends. I finally picked a glove that felt right and started walking toward the main aisle to find Dad. But she fell in step, talking about drills and how to break a glove in, and how she knows a kid your size who got scouted, which sounded dumb 'cause I'm 11. I walked faster, and she matched me like she didn't even notice. I spotted Dad with Emma at the shoe bench and went straight to him, leaned close, and whispered that some lady wouldn't leave me alone. Dad's ex-Marine, he immediately clocked it. He didn't freak, just looked past me once, real quick. The woman stopped a few yards away, pretending to look at a basket of baseballs, flipping one in her hand like she didn't care. Dad told Emma to keep trying shoes with the employee. "We'll be right back, kiddo," and took my hand, steady grip, and led me toward checkout to pay for my glove. I looked back and she was following us at a distance, staying maybe 20 feet behind and drifting whenever we drifted, like a shadow that keeps the same angle. While Dad paid, I stood by the gum rack and could see her posted near the entrance, just watching, not shopping, not talking to staff, just watching. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand my dad isn't the yell at people type. He says clear rules beat loud noise. He finished the transaction and told the cashier, "1 second," then turned to me and said he'd grab Emma, but I needed to wait right there by the security guard at the entrance. Don't move at all, and if anyone talked to me, point at the guard. He looked me in the eye to make sure I heard, "Got it?" and I said yeah. He walked off calm, not fast, and came back with Emma in like 2 minutes, her laces still half tied, and then we headed as a group for the exit, me between Dad and the guard, because that was the most obvious safe spot. His idea. Suddenly the woman was next to me from the side aisle, like she'd timed it, holding out a business card, talking really fast. "If you want baseball training, call me. I'm a coach. I find talent, no pressure." And her hand was almost in my face. Dad intercepted the card before I could touch it, and he didn't even glance at it. He just kept it in his palm and spun a half step so his shoulder was between me and her. Then he asked her directly, plain voice, no cussing, "Why are you following my son?" The woman's smile didn't move her eyes. She repeated she was just a coach looking for talent, and she said I had great physicality for 11 or 12, which made me want to say I'm 11, but I didn't. Dad called over the security guard. "Can we verify she's a coach, please?" and handed him the card. The guard took it and keyed his radio, asked the office to check a name and number, and while he was still talking, the woman started backing toward the exit, muttering that we were overreacting. She rushed out to the parking lot and disappeared between the cars before security could stop her, and it wasn't like a sprint or anything, more like she knew the angles, head down, quick steps, and then she was gone behind a big SUV. The guard went to the doors but didn't chase. "They're not supposed to leave the store," he said, and he came back to us with the business card in his hand. He looked at it, flipped it over, and told Dad there wasn't any sports academy with that name in the city, and the number printed on it wasn't a business line. It was just a personal cell, which made my stomach do this drop, even though I was trying to stand there normal. Dad kept it simple. He asked if they could pull video and write an incident number, and the guard nodded and guided us to the side podium by the podium computer, and he talked into his radio again. A manager came out, typed stuff, timestamps, female, 40s, gray hoodie, ponytail, that kind of thing, and he handed Dad a little slip with the incident number and the store phone. Dad said he wanted to file a report with police, not to make a scene, just because, if she tries this again, you'll want a record, and the manager agreed. We walked to our car together, Dad holding both me and Emma by the hand, even though Emma complained she couldn't fix her laces, and he kept scanning the rows of cars, mirrors, the spaces near the cart corral, nothing dramatic, just steady checking. In the car, Dad explained plain and flat that real coaches don't approach kids inside stores and they never give personal numbers to random children, and even if they did, they talk to the parent first. That's just how it works. He said I did the right thing telling him right away instead of trying to be polite or handle it myself, and I told him I wasn't trying to be rude. I just wanted to leave, and he said that was exactly right. At home, he showed the card to Mom at the kitchen table, and they decided to report it to the local police, not to freak me out, just in case she was trying this with other kids. A patrol officer came by after dinner, took the info, wrote in a little notebook, and said that since no actual crime occurred and she didn't touch me or make a direct threat, they couldn't do much, but they'd flag it and increase patrols near the store for a bit. And he thanked us for calling because patterns matter more than one big thing, which made sense. Now when I go places without my parents, I try to stay near other people, and I don't talk to strangers no matter how friendly they seem. Like I'll just nod and point to a worker if somebody asks me something personal because I'm not getting into that again. That incident scared me because the woman looked completely normal, smiling and polite, like any regular adult in line for returns. And I kept thinking if Dad hadn't been right there, what would she have said next? Or where would she have tried to lead me? And why risk that at all? Dad told me that's exactly what danger looks like most of the time, just ordinary. And the ordinary part is what gets kids to go along. So you have to treat weird questions like alarms, even if nothing else looks wrong. Mom called the sports store later that week, and the manager said they'd identified the woman on camera. They had her entering and leaving, time stamped and clear enough to see her face. But she'd slipped out before security could question her, and she hasn't been back since. At least not on the shifts he checked. I still play baseball, and I still go to stores, but I'm way more aware now of adults who ask too many questions, or who mirror your walking like they're attached by a rope, and it's not me being rude, it's just safer. Emma doesn't know how serious it was because Dad just told her some lady was being weird, and we left. He didn't want to scare her or make her hate going out. But he talked to me privately that night. No drama, just the facts, and explained stranger danger in a real way. Not the cartoon version at school with, "Don't take candy." More like how most bad people don't look scary or act mean at first. They act nice and helpful to get information and gain trust, and that's what makes them dangerous. I'm glad my dad was there and knew what to do, because I honestly didn't realize how bad the situation was until he explained it later. Last summer, I came back from college for break and got a job doing food delivery. Spent most of my days driving around dropping off orders. I usually grabbed lunch in the university district between runs. Nothing fancy, just fast and cheap so I could get back on the road. Mid-June, I tried this new place called Boston Tea Party that had opened the week before, and this waitress Rachel served me. Woman maybe 32 with a short pixie cut and a dozen bracelets jangling on both wrists. She was super chatty, asking about school, my job, what music I was into, and I figured she wanted a good tip, whatever. But then it kept going. What year I was, where I lived, what I did for fun, question after question while I was trying to eat my sandwich and check my app for the next pickup. When I was almost done, she actually sat down across from me at my table, even though the cafe was packed and she clearly had other tables. I laughed it off, said I had to get back to runs, slid my card out so she'd take it and go. She didn't. She leaned on her elbow like we were friends already and asked if I was local or just here for the semester. Then asked if I lifted because my forearms looked strong, not true. And I kept glancing at the counter hoping a manager would call her back. Nobody did. I paid, tossed my trash, and on my way out she said, "You should come by on your day off," with this look like it wasn't optional. Next day I avoided that block. I told myself it was just a weird shift and not a big deal, and honestly I forgot about it because deliveries were heavy. Apartment buzzers that didn't work, office parks with 5 buildings sharing one address, the usual. About a week and a half later, I ended up back there because everywhere else was closed for a health inspection, and I needed something quick between orders. Rachel came straight to my table again like we were picking up from last time. She pitched hard on frequent customer discounts, said she could text me codes. I said I don't give out my number, and she laughed like I was joking, then asked again, softer, like she was doing me a favor. I said I'd just checked the website. Her smile dropped for half a second. Small, but I clocked it. I finished fast and left. Thought that was the end of it. Couple days later, I wrapped my shift around 6 and went to the university gym where I lifted 3 days a week. Small building, card scanner up front, vending machine that only took quarters if you flattened them just right, and a short haul to the lockers. I did my usual routine: bench, rows, legs, headphones in, keeping to myself. About an hour in, I showered quick and stepped out of the locker room and saw Rachel. She was at the registration desk talking to the student worker and cutting little sideways looks at me like she was confirming it was my face. She wasn't in workout clothes, just jeans and a t-shirt, no bag, no water bottle. Clearly not there to exercise. When our eyes met, she waved big and started toward me like we'd planned to meet. I didn't wait to find out what she wanted. I turned down the hall to the back emergency exit that leads to the rear parking lot. It's one of those push-bar doors that sometimes sets off an alarm, and I figured I'd apologize later if it screamed. It didn't. I walked fast, then jogged the last stretch, got in my car, locked up, checked my mirrors. No one followed. I took 2 random turns home out of instinct and kept watching the rear view like an idiot even though I didn't see anything. That evening, my older brother Jason was home for the weekend. He's in law school, so he treats everything like a checklist, which is great when you don't want drama, just steps. We were in the kitchen with the TV murmuring in the next room, and I told him the Boston Tea Party thing, then the discount number push, then the gym lobby. He didn't interrupt, just asked for dates, and whether I'd given her anything to contact me, no. Whether I posted my gym schedule, no. Whether she could have seen my profile somewhere public, maybe my delivery app shirt, but that's not a directory. Okay, he said, this is stalking behavior. She's probing for access, phone, routine, places you go. If she shows up again someplace that isn't her work, we document it and call the cops. He had me open a note on my phone to log time and place. If you can take a photo without engaging, do it. Stop going to that cafe. Vary your routes a little. Park under lights. If she approaches, say you're uncomfortable and want her to stop. Clear and short. Then leave. None of it sounded crazy. He said he'd ride with me the next day if I had to grab anything near campus, just to see if she appeared again, and to keep our parents out of it unless it escalated because Mom spirals. We kept our voices low, and he ended with, if she presses again, we file. Paper trail makes people back off, I agreed, but I figured maybe she'd get the hint after I literally ran away from her at the gym. I went to bed around midnight, but at 12:30, I woke up to this noise outside. Someone walking on the gravel in our yard. My bedroom's on the first floor, and I looked through the blinds. Rachel was standing near my parents' garage, maybe 60 feet from the house, shining her phone flashlight at the windows like she was trying to figure out which room was mine. My heart just stopped. I crept upstairs and woke up Jason, whispered what was happening. He didn't hesitate, grabbed his old baseball bat from the closet and said, "Stay behind me." He went straight out the front door, and I stuck to the porch light. He stepped into the yard and shouted, "Hey!" Normal voice, not panicking, and the light swung and hit us, and she froze like she got caught stealing. He walked toward her, steady pace, bat down by his leg, and that was it. She turned and sprinted, jumped our low fence into the neighbor's yard, and cut down the street between parked cars. Jason stopped at the fence, hands up like he was done, and yelled that he was calling the police and to get off the property. I heard her shoes smack the pavement and then nothing. He told me to lock the side gate, and we went back in. We went back inside and I dialed 911. Whole thing felt surreal. Like, how did this escalate so fast? The dispatcher asked if she'd threatened us, if she was still on scene, if we recognized her. I said she was a waitress from a cafe and she'd followed me to the gym earlier that day, and now this. Patrol rolled up in about 10 minutes and I met them at the door with Jason and the bat set by the frame. I explained the cafe, the number push, the gym, now my house. They took down her description, name of the cafe, the bracelets, the haircut, approximate height, all of it. One officer asked if she said anything tonight. No, just the flashlight and staring at the windows. They checked the fence line with their flashlights, scanned the street, and came back for our statements in the kitchen. Jason gave dates and times straight from the note on my phone and said he'd sign a trespass complaint. The older officer said, "Do not engage her. If she shows again, call immediately," and handed me a card with a case number. Jason stayed up an hour watching the front window while I tried to sleep. I didn't really sleep. Next day, just after lunch, a detective called. He asked for the full timeline again and had me text over my notes. He said they were heading to the cafe to speak with her. Around 3, he called back and said they'd picked her up at work without incident. He told me she had a prior warning for stalking a young guy 2 towns over 2 years earlier. Same kind of thing, pushing for contact info, showing up at places she knew he'd be, then outside his house. That time the kid left for a job and the case stalled. "We're charging her this time," he said. "She came to your residence at night." That crosses the line. He said a no-contact order would be filed immediately and the arraignment judge would set conditions and to forward any messages if she somehow reached me. I said I never gave her my number. He said not to underestimate people's ability to dig. Jason stayed the rest of the week. He slept downstairs on the couch, made a point of being seen at the front window at random times, and rode with me on a couple deliveries near campus so I didn't have to second-guess my mirrors. We varied our route home. Our parents asked why he extended his visit, and he said he was cramming for finals, which was close enough. The cafe manager called my phone the next day, no idea how he found it, and left a message saying Rachel wouldn't be serving for a while, and he hoped there were no hard feelings. I saved the voicemail and sent it to the detective. 2 days later, he confirmed the no-contact order and gave me the court date. Jason tapped the bat by the door and said, "Leave it there till this is over." And we did. Looking back, I should have reported her after the gym thing, at least told the front desk. But I didn't think it would go that far, and I didn't want to get someone fired if it was just awkward flirting, which sounds dumb now. I don't mess around with maybes anymore. If someone pushes for personal info or shows up where I live, I treat it as a threat first and sort out the tone later. I still get nervous when I see waitstaff being overly friendly. So when I was 22, I got a job as a night shift attendant at a 24-hour laundromat called Wash and Go on the outskirts of town. It was right after I dropped out of community college, needed something to pay my rent, and this place was hiring immediately. The work was mind-numbing and the pay was terrible, but it covered my studio apartment and didn't require any special skills. My shifts ran from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., and my responsibilities were pretty basic. Help customers with the washing and drying machines, sell detergent from the vending machine, and keep the place clean. We'd get maybe 2 or 3 customers per night, mostly students or other night shift workers. I thought about quitting so many times, but inertia and lack of options kept me there. That evening started normally enough. I spread my accounting textbooks on the counter, planning to study for my certification exam, and played some quiet music from my phone. I wiped lint from the floor, restocked the change cups, and did the thing where I pretend to care about depreciation schedules, even though my eyes were burning. The fluorescent light over the folding table had that annoying buzz it always had around midnight. I kept telling myself I'd mention it to the day manager and never did. 2 empty rolling carts, a mop bucket, and the smell of warm detergent. same as always. I checked the wall clock. It lagged about 3 minutes, and I mentally added them back. Little habits you pick up to stay awake. A car went past outside, slow enough to make me glance at the window, but it didn't stop. I went back to highlighting sample questions and figured the night would just melt together like usual. Around 12:30 a.m., a woman in her early 40s walked in carrying 2 large laundry bags. She looked exhausted, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, wearing a faded tracksuit. She didn't say a word, just walked to the machines at the far wall, loaded laundry into 3 washers at once, and fed bills into the coin slots. I went back to my textbooks, but kept glancing at her because something felt off. She was acting restless, walking to the front window every few minutes to look outside, then returning to the machines even though the wash cycles had just started. After about 20 minutes, she came to the counter and asked me to break a 20 into quarters for the dryers. I opened the register, gave her the change, and noticed her hands were trembling slightly. "You okay?" I asked, but she just nodded and turned away. I felt this vague sense of unease but couldn't pinpoint why. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand how quiet that place usually was. No security guard, just me, a landline by the register, and a panic button that never actually worked. The owner said it was pending service for months. I wasn't helpless or anything. I kept the keys for the coin boxes on a ring clipped to my belt loop, which is honestly just how the manager showed me to do it, and that was that. The woman kept shifting her weight, glancing at the door, then at me, then at the spinning washers like she was timing something. I told myself not to be dramatic. People get weird about their laundry. I'd seen grown men argue over a dryer like it was a custody dispute. 15 minutes later, the entrance door slammed open and a tall, thin man in a dark hoodie burst in. He kept his right hand in the hoodie pocket and headed straight for the counter. "Register now," he shouted. I froze as he pulled a black handgun from his pocket and pointed it at my face. "Money from the register and the machines right now." My fingers were shaking as I opened the cash drawer. There was about $130 in bills and some loose change. I put everything in a plastic bag and handed it to him. He grabbed it but didn't leave. Instead, he ordered me to open the detergent vending machines and the coin boxes on the washers. I obeyed, using my special key to unlock the compartments and emptying the quarters into his bag. That's when I noticed the woman in the tracksuit standing by the door, calmly blocking the exit and watching everything unfold. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. They were working together. The way she kept checking the street, the way she hovered by the door like it was her job, all of it clicked and I felt stupid for not calling it earlier. But also, what was I gonna do? Start a fight with a gun in my face? He noticed me looking at her and smirked like he was proud of the teamwork. "Smart girl," he said, and he kept the gun up, not shaking, not rushing, just controlling the room. He made me move station to station. First the soap dispenser, then the snack machine. We barely sold chips after midnight, but it still held bills. Then the softener boxes. He told me to grab every bill and every roll of quarters, and I did, because I could see he wasn't bluffing. It added up fast. 4 vending machines, then 3 washer coin boxes I popped open with the ring key. Thick stacks of quarters sliding into the bag until my wrist ached. He told me not to look at his face. I focused on his chest and the edge of the counter, and the sound of quarters hitting plastic. Meanwhile, the woman moved like she'd done it before. She yanked open the washers mid-cycle and hauled out clumps of wet clothes, didn't even flinch at the water, shoved everything into the same 2 bags she'd brought in. She was calm in a way that made my skin crawl, like this was laundry plus robbery, just multitasking. She kept one eye on the street and one eye on me. When he said, "We're done," she looped the straps over her shoulders and shifted so she was squarely in front of the door, and he said, "Face the wall, count to 100, I did it. I pressed my forehead to the cold tile seam and started counting out loud because he wanted to hear it. And I listened to their footsteps, fast, coordinated. Then the door, the heavy spring squeak, a slam, and a car engine turning over hard and going. At 62, I stopped. Because what if they were still there? But it was quiet, except for one lone dryer thumping a shoe someone left inside. When I turned around, the place looked wrong in tiny ways. One change cup tipped over, the counter drawer still open, the floor splotched with washer water, and a tiny child's t-shirt, pink with a faded unicorn, jammed under the lip of a machine like it had been kicked in the rush. I hit the panic button anyway. It lit up, but I didn't trust it. Then picked up the landline and dialed 911. I gave the address, the description, the direction of the car, eastbound, and then I slid down against the counter and hugged my knees just to keep them from shaking out from under me. And I waited. Patrol pulled up in 12 minutes. 2 officers, 1 older, 1 young, and they came in with hands on their belts, not dramatic, just scanning. I told them right away about the gun and the direction of travel and the quarters, and the older one asked, "Any customers before them?" I said no. They split up. One took my statement at the counter, while the other checked the back room and the tiny restroom for anything dropped or stashed. I showed them the t-shirt, the open machines, the bag hook where I kept the keys. They asked about cameras. I pointed to the 2 domes, front door and over the counter, and the young one called it in for evidence pickup. We watched the playback on the little monitor in the office. You could see her arrive first, circle, then him storm in gun out. Easy ID on the hoodie logo and his walk. I signed the property loss list. $130 from the till, approximately $300 in quarters, some candy machine cash, and they bagged the panic button to note it worked. 9 days later, a detective named Alvarez called me on my lunch break. He said they got them 200 miles downstate after a clerk hit an alarm during a copycat robbery. Same pattern, same timing. He gave me names: Roger King, 42, Cindy Hart, 39. He said both had a stack of priors, petty theft, possession, probation violations, and they'd hit 11 places in 3 weeks. Laundromats, car washes, a motel coin room, even a rink concession stand. Twice they went hands-on with employees who tried to shut a door on them. A clerk got a broken wrist. Another needed stitches. Alvarez asked me to confirm IDs from stills. I did. The ponytail and the hoodie matched. He said the DA would be in touch if they needed me, and that was kind of it. 3 weeks after, I wrote my resignation on a sticky note and handed it to my manager during shift change, and I took a daytime job shelving at a bookstore for less money, but better sleep, and people who whisper instead of scream, and I tell myself that's the trait I wanted anyway. Sometimes I replay the way her hands shook when she asked for change, and I wonder if she was scared too, or just wired from whatever they were chasing. And I hate that I even care. But it sticks in my head like that pink t-shirt. Because if I'd noticed sooner, would anything have changed? Or did I do the only thing anyone does when there's a gun and a plan already in motion? So back in fall of 2022, me and my friend Rachel were doing this photography project for our college class. We were both at Portland Community, studying photojournalism, and we needed shots of abandoned places. Rachel was the kind of person who never backed down from anything. Fearless, protective, always first through the door. She died last winter in a car accident, and I think about her every single day. This story is about the time she literally saved our lives. There were 5 of us total. Me, Rachel, and 3 other students from our program named Brandon, Tyler, and Sophia. We decided to shoot at this old psychiatric hospital called Crestview, about 30 miles outside the city. Place had been shut down since the late 90s after some abuse scandal. We left around noon on a Saturday, 2 cars, planning to get our shots and be home before dark. I had a checklist: batteries, extra SD cards, masks for dust. And Rachel tossed me her cheap walkie like, "We're not gonna need these, but humor me." We got there around 1. The driveway gate was off its hinges, so we didn't have to hop anything. The air smelled like wet leaves and insulation, and the only things I paid attention to were the doorways and the stairwells, stuff I'd have to move through. The building looked exactly like you'd expect. Massive gray brick, 3 stories, half the windows blown out, part of the roof caved in. Creepy as hell, but perfect for what we needed. We did a quick perimeter. Then Brandon said we should split up by floors to cover more ground faster. It wasn't dumb. Daylight was dropping and we had to finish. So Rachel and I took the second floor while the others stayed on the first. 15-minute check-ins, Rachel said, tapping her phone. Inside, the hallways were trashed. Broken drywall, busted fluorescent tubes, a laundry cart on its side. I kept my lens on things with dates, calendars, a therapy board, stuff that would prove the time. I was shooting a row of smashed mirrors in a treatment room when Rachel called, "Lauren, over here." She stood in a patient room with the door half off the hinges. On the wall above the bed frame was spray paint in red. Not dusty, not faded. Glossy. It said, "They know you're here." Underneath was a list of names block-lettered in a different hand. Brian, Kat, Lucy, Brandon. I said, "Nope," half joking, and Rachel was already framing it up. She zoomed on Brandon's name, then stepped back for context. "Group chat," she said, and snapped a photo of her camera screen to send. I walked closer and felt that dumb compulsion to touch it. I know, gross. And when my finger came away red, I said, "It's wet." We both looked at the door frame. Red flecks on the bent hinge, a drip that hadn't skinned over yet. The building was cold and still, but the paint said someone was here right now, or had been minutes ago. Rachel texted the photo with, "You jokers upstairs?" Brandon replied in like 2 seconds, "We're by the lobby. Haven't moved." Tyler added, "Still first floor." Not funny. Rachel didn't reply. She held up my finger like I'd been caught stealing and said, "We regroup." Now we moved fast to the stairs. My bag kept thumping my hip, and every shadow looked like a person crouched. On the landing, Rachel keyed her walkie. "Meet main entrance." Brandon crackled back, "Copy." We came down into that long foyer where the paint was flaking off in plates, and Brandon and Tyler were by the busted admissions desk, Sophia a few feet back by the door glass. Rachel handed Sophia her phone. "Fresh," she said. Sophia's face tightened and she said, "We should go." Brandon took the phone and breathed out through his nose. "Coincidence," he said, like he wanted it to be a math problem, not a decision. "Coincidence my ass," Rachel said, but not loud. Tyler shrugged at Brandon like, "Your call." I said, "Half hour, outside, broad daylight shots." I wasn't trying to be brave, I was trying to be done fast. Brandon latched onto that. "Half hour," he said. "It's a common name, seriously. Portland has like 1,000,000 Brandons." Sophia shook her head but didn't argue. Rachel looked at me, then at the front door, then at the light rectangle on the floor. "Fine," she said. "Backlot. We stick together. If anything feels off, we're gone." We filed through the hallway toward the rear exit, past a room with old administration chairs and a dead copier. I kept thinking about that drip not skinned over, how fast paint dries, how I had no baseline for that, and I hated that I was doing the math while walking toward an unknown. Out the back, The yard was broken asphalt and weeds up through the cracks. A chain link section had fallen, and beyond it was the staff parking area. Cracked lines, a light pole with no head, a loading dock with a roll-up door stuck half open. It was quiet. Just the kind of quiet where you hear your own bag straps creak. We spread maybe 10 feet across without meaning to. Cameras up like that would help. "Shoot fast," Rachel said. She was already taking wide frames of the dock, the stair rails, the dumpster. Brandon and Tyler drifted right toward a peeling sign that said, "Receiving." Sophia stayed close to me. I got a few frames of the roll-up's jagged shadow. Then a sound cut in, low, mechanical, building. Not city noise, engines. We heard the trucks before we saw them. 3, maybe, coming from the tree line behind the far fence. Big pickups, lifted, tires clicking on gravel, windows tinted so dark it looked like glossed-out masks. They didn't stomp it. They eased in like they'd done it 100 times. Rachel said, "Do not point the cameras," without looking at us, and hers went down on her strap, lens turned to her chest. Brandon said, "We're on public property, aren't we?" And Tyler said, "No, dude," under his breath. The pickups pulled up behind the hospital, 2 nose-to-nose near the loading dock and 1 angled to block the break in the fence. Doors opened. Several men climbed out in work coveralls, no logos, all the same cut, moving like they had a plan. No one talked. One guy tapped the roll-up with a gloved knuckle and another waved him off. They weren't using the building entrance. Instead, they dropped tailgates and started unloading plastic containers. One of them turned and saw us. He yelled something to the others and they dropped what they were holding and started walking toward us fast. Rachel grabbed my hand and told everyone to run. We bolted across the parking lot toward our cars with these guys chasing us. I could hear their boots on the pavement and someone shouting. We got to the cars and peeled out, but the trucks were already starting up behind us. The narrow road out of there turned into a chase. Brandon's Jeep pulled ahead, but Rachel's Honda started falling behind. One of the trucks closed on our bumper, horn blasting. Rachel slammed the brakes, whipped the wheel, spun the car half around, caught it, and then floored it straight past the truck's grill before it could swing. We shot back toward the lot entrance and the trucks pivoted to follow us. I was screaming, asking what the hell she was doing, and she just said, "They'll come after you." She meant Brandon and the others. The lead truck hesitated, then picked us, and the second one lagged like it was waiting for orders. Rachel dropped a gear and cut down a dirt access lane that barely qualified as a road. 2 ruts, a bent service sign, trees tight on both sides. The Honda bucked and my camera bag hammered my thigh. Branches snapped against the mirrors. In the rear glass, that grill filled everything. "Seatbelt," she said, not looking. The lane hooked left, then right, then dipped through a shallow creek, and the car splashed and kept going. "Maps?" she asked. I checked my phone and there was nothing, just no bars and a useless blue dot. The track forked and the left side was churned with deep ruts, so Rachel took the right because the ground looked less chewed up, and also because the trees thinned in that direction. We broke into a clearing with chain link and an old service gate. The lock was huge, but the posts were bent. "We make it," she said, and lined up dead center. The mirrors scraped metal, and we popped through onto a gravel lane that paralleled the highway with gaps in the trees flashing traffic. The truck punched the same gap and came after us, tailgate rattling, plastic containers banging around in its bed. Rachel kept it straight and waited for an opening, and then turned on the blinker like a normal person and merged into the highway between a minivan and a delivery van. The truck hung back, maybe because of traffic, or because attention is bad for certain kinds of work. I don't know. Rachel took the next right toward town, then a left, then cut through a grocery lot, and when we came out the other side, the mirror was empty. 2 minutes later, we pulled into a gas station by the highway where Brandon's Jeep sat crooked at pump 4. Tyler had his hands on his knees. Sophia's face was pale and tight. Brandon hugged Rachel hard and called her crazy, and she told him to buy fuel and keep it normal. We went inside together and did boring things on purpose. Bathroom key, bottled water, gum, because we didn't want a scene if those trucks rolled past. I watched the lot from the back door, while Rachel watched the road through the glass. 2 months later, the hospital was bulldozed for structural instability. A year later, Rachel was gone, and I never told her what day meant. Something illegal was happening there. We almost didn't make it out. I owe Rachel everything. During my junior year at this private boarding school, I started getting these anonymous threatening letters. The first one was folded inside my locker like it belonged there. Plain printer paper, blocky font, no signature. Just this short essay on how a flick to the ear or a pinch to my arm would drop me, and what someone could do while I was out. It knew about my condition. My pain threshold is basically non-existent, and if I get a sudden sharp pain, I faint. And that wasn't a secret. The nurse knew, and my roommates knew, and it was in my file for staff. I took it to the dorm supervisor with my hands shaking, and she read it, frowned, and said it was probably a mean prank. Without proof, there's nothing to do, she told me. Like I should keep it quiet so I didn't attract more attention. I asked if they could at least check camera footage near the lockers, and she said those cameras weren't monitored like that. I walked back to my room trying to decide if I was supposed to pretend none of it happened or file it away like evidence, so I did both. I hid the note in a folder and tried to act normal. 2 days later, little things were off. My history binder a little crooked, my shampoo cap not fully closed, and I kept telling myself I was being dramatic, but it felt like when you put your key down and someone breathes behind you. I stopped lingering after dinner. I showered at weird hours. I braided my hair tight because the letter mentioned grabbing it. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand that I wasn't trying to be reckless. I told the nurse. I told my roommate. I copied the note. But the weirdest part was how normal everyone else acted. Like I was the only one who could hear a clock ticking. In class, I sat near doors. In the dining hall, I kept my back to the wall because that felt like doing something. It didn't help much. Every small laugh sounded like it was about me, which I know is dumb. But the whole place started to feel smaller, like I was walking inside a set of rules that didn't apply to whoever wrote that letter. A week later, another note slid under my door while I was at breakfast, which meant someone knew my schedule. This one read like a lab report, talking about stimulus and response times, latency to syncope, controllable variables, neat little paragraphs that sounded like someone doing homework on me. It used my full name and student ID. I walked it straight to the headmaster and didn't sit down. He scanned it, sighed like he'd been waiting for me to finish so he could already say no, and went. Without the sender's name or witnesses, there's not a formal process to initiate. He suggested maybe it was jealousy from other girls or an intimidation attempt. He told me to change my locker combo and be more careful. I asked for staff to do random hall sweeps or for my door lock to be checked, and he said maintenance could look next week. On my way out, his secretary asked if I wanted a peppermint. The school shrank after that. I avoided stairwells and the basement corridor by the laundry because sound carries weird down there. I dropped the library closing shift because the cartwheel's squeak hid footsteps, and I couldn't do that guessing game anymore. Sleep got sloppy. I kept my phone flashlight on my desk pointed at the door. I layered my clothes under my blazer because soft fabric blunts pinches a little. Placebo or not, it was something I could control. The nurse, who knows my chart by heart, asked whether I was hydrating and I said yes, and didn't mention the second letter because last time I did nothing happened except I got told to relax. My grades slid, and my chem teacher wrote focus on a quiz, and I wanted to laugh, like sure, I'll go focus in a hallway where someone knows exactly how to make me hit the floor. My roommate started asking if I'd walk her to the vending machines, which sounds sweet, except it meant she was scared too, and neither of us said why. I found myself rehearsing what to do if I felt that sharp snap of pain. Sit, elbows on knees, chin down, breathe through it. Because if I went out cold in an empty space, that was exactly the window they'd planned for, right? A month after the first note, the third one was waiting on my desk when I came back from chapel, placed dead center on my notebook like a gift. It was brutal in a very specific way. It broke down how to exploit my condition for an assault, how sharp pain could prime compliance, how a wrist twist could drop me for 60 to 180 seconds, what to do with those seconds. Then it swerved into my family and my pets with details that weren't public. My brother's bus stop, the road my mom takes to work, my dog's name. I sat down so I wouldn't literally pass out from panic and give whoever it was exactly what they wanted. I took a photo, put the note back in the folder, and walked to the headmaster's office again. I didn't yell, but my voice went flat. I said, "This is escalating. This includes my family, and if anything happens to me or them, it's on this office." He said, "I hear you. Hands up," then said policy required a general response before any targeted action. That afternoon, he held an assembly and did a general "bullying is unacceptable" speech without naming anything. He didn't say there were threats, didn't say a student with a medical condition had been targeted, didn't ask for tips or names. He read a policy paragraph and stepped away from the mic. People whispered and glanced at me anyway because news moves faster than policy. And when I walked out, a couple of the popular girls were smirking like it was free entertainment. Everyone knew the athletes had their mean rituals, and everyone knew nothing ever stuck to them because trophies look good in brochures. I asked my dorm supervisor again for a lock change and she said, "Maintenance is backed up." I asked a teacher I trusted if there was anything she could do, and she said to keep documenting and stay with friends. I did all of that. I did everything they told me, and I still felt completely powerless and betrayed by the people who were supposed to protect me. Final straw came in the locker room after gym class. I was changing fast because I'd started doing that. Shirt off, shirt on, don't linger. When hands clamped my shoulders from behind and pinned my traps, hard, like someone knew exactly where to press. Pain flashed and my legs went loose. I yelled and spun and my knee slammed the bench. By the time I caught myself on a locker, the far door was swinging. I heard laughter in the hallway. Not loud, just that mean little burst you recognize because you've been on the wrong side of it before. And I knew right then it wasn't bluff talk anymore. It was a plan. I threw on my shirt wrong side out and grabbed my bag. I went straight to the nurse. She checked my pulse, asked if I'd blacked out, wrote shoulder tenderness, bilateral on the form. I told her they hit pressure points, and she actually nodded like that matched something she'd seen, which made me want to sit down, but I kept moving. I asked her to take pictures of the marks with the school camera, because timestamps matter if anyone ever pretends they care. She did. I took the printouts and the third letter and walked to the headmaster's office and didn't wait for an appointment. He looked at the photos, then at me. "Do you know who it was?" "Number." "Any witnesses willing to sign?" Laughter outside the door, I said, and names I could guess, but I wouldn't lie. He repeated that locker rooms are difficult environments for surveillance, and there are camera blind spots by policy. He said he regretted I felt unsafe, and that the letters were still just letters, and that education, not discipline, was the standard first step. I said, "Someone put hands on me." He said, I'll speak to coaches. I called my parents from the courtyard because I needed people who didn't answer to him. I read the third note out loud, line by line, and described the grab step by step. My mom went quiet and said, "Pack a bag. We're coming now." My dad asked me to copy everything twice. That night the four of us sat in his office again, and my dad pushed a folder onto the desk, tabs, dates, photos, and said, "We're removing her." Today the headmaster kept circling, without concrete evidence, like the phrase could end the conversation. He offered wellness counseling. He offered schedule changes. My mom said, "No." The next morning my parents met with the registrar while I signed withdrawal forms with my RA standing there, which almost made me laugh. Now they had staff to spare. Coaches passed by without looking in. A couple girls leaned in the doorway, the kind who never get benched, watching the way people watch a TV in a waiting room. The headmaster shook my hand and said he regretted how I had perceived events. I said, "The letters were instructions," and he blinked, and that was the end of it. We loaded my stuff into the car in 3 trips. No one stopped us. Homeschooling wasn't a plan we had sitting around, but we made it work because the alternative was staying where I was a project for someone. My parents pushed me to finish strong, and I did, because quitting wasn't the point. Leaving danger was. The headmaster sent a letter that said he was sorry but still insisted without names and signatures and footage. His hands were tied. He wrote "our community values" in quotes like they were sacred. My mom kept every document in a plastic bin. I didn't argue with her about that. After that, I handled school differently. I avoided empty hallways. I learned to sit with my back to a wall without making it obvious. I told teachers early about my condition and exactly what to do if I fainted, and I watched who wrote it down. I kept my circles small. It wasn't dramatic. It was maintenance, like locking a door. I wish that sounded braver, but honestly, it was just what kept me from being the easiest target in every room. The whole experience left permanent marks. I became this people-pleasing version of myself as an adult, always smoothing things over, saying sorry first and often, trying to keep everyone happy so they won't turn on me. Sounds pathetic, but the fear is real. The memory of multiple people hating me enough to plan my suffering in clinical detail, while the administration treated it like a PR problem. I'm in my late 20s now, and still have nights where I'm back in that hallway counting doors and checking how far it is to the nearest adult. What sticks and won't let go is how they wouldn't act. Reputation and the athletes meant more than one kid's safety. Part of me still wonders if the girls who sent those letters moved on to someone else, or if getting away with it made them worse. I'll never know who they were, because there was no investigation to answer it. Every time I see a headline about abuse at a boarding school, I think, if someone had taken the first complaint seriously, how many stories just like mine wouldn't exist? So when I was 22, I was living in my first solo apartment, a tiny studio on the first floor of an old 3-story building in the college district. It was my first time really on my own after 2 years of sharing a dorm room with a girl who snored like a tractor. And yeah, the place was small, 1 room with a kitchenette and a closet-sized bathroom. But it was mine, and I was weirdly proud of every squeaky cabinet hinge. I bartended nights at a place on Main Street 4 nights a week, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and crammed in sociology classes during the day, so my schedule was like stacked but manageable. I usually got home somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, dead on my feet, thinking only about a shower and passing out. I didn't really know my neighbors. I heard footsteps above sometimes, never saw whoever it was. The building was older, but the area felt fine, or at least I thought it was fine, which is kind of the point here. That Thursday in mid-October, it was cold and raining, the kind of misty rain that soaks you anyway, and my shift ended around 1:30. I counted tips, told the cook goodnight, pulled my hoodie up, and jogged across the slick alley to my car on the back lot. The drive home is like 4 minutes, tops. I parked where I always did behind the building and went up the exterior metal stairs to my door, first floor, but the landing's raised a bit off the ground so you're not directly at street level. And I was digging in my tote for keys, thinking about how my socks were wet, when I noticed the door was open a hair. Not swinging or anything, just 2, maybe 3 centimeters off the latch. I knew I'd locked it that morning. I always yanked it twice. It's one of those sticky older locks that need a firm turn. My stomach did that little drop, and I stood there with my head tilted, trying to see into the gap. It was pitch dark inside. I leaned in and listened. From the back of the room, like beyond the futon and the kitchenette, something shifted. The sound was small, not dramatic. Fabric against fabric, a shoe on linoleum, something real. I didn't try to be brave. I just turned around and went back down the steps fast. Fast, but not running because I didn't want to slip on that wet metal. And I got to my car, and my hands were shaking so bad I fumbled the key twice at the door. I got in, hit the locks, and stared up at my door like it was going to swing open. My first thought was 911. Then another thought hit me. And I don't know why my brain went there. Maybe because I didn't want to explain an "I think" to the dispatcher before I was sure. Maybe because the bar was 2 blocks from the station, and I just handed out a drink special to a rookie cop and didn't want to be the girl who cries wolf. I don't know. I called my boyfriend Kyle. He was with his parents in another city for the weekend, asleep for sure. He answered with that groggy, "Huh?" noise, and I made my voice bright and normal. "Hey babe." "Yep, I just pulled up." "You gonna meet me at the door? I'm coming up right now." He went, "Jess, what?" And I talked over him, kept it rolling. "Perfect. I see your car. You're already here?" "Awesome." I put the phone on speaker and held it to my ear like I was mid-conversation. I know that makes no sense, but it felt right. Then turned in my seat so whoever might be listening could hear me, and I raised my voice toward the stairs. "Kyle, you upstairs?" "I'm coming." Like I was announcing a 6-foot guy was about to appear at any second. The logic was simple. If someone was in there expecting me alone, they'd hear a name and a plan they didn't like. Rain ticked on the windshield and my door stayed like that. Cracked, black line in the frame. I kept my eyes on it and said into the phone, still loud, "You locked the deadbolt, right?" "Cool. I'm getting the bags from the trunk," Kyle whispered. "Jessica, what's going on?" I ignored him. I laid on the horn for one quick honk. Not long, just sharp, like a heads-up honk. Then I opened my door and shut it again, loud, and set off my own car's trunk release so it thunked open, then shut it right away with another thunk so it sounded like 2 people messing with luggage. I kept up the fake play-by-play. "Grab the bag, babe." "Yeah, that one." "Thanks." Up on the landing, nothing moved. The door didn't inch wider, didn't close. Water ran off the railing in rivulets, and everything smelled like cold metal and wet leaves, and I kept saying normal couple stuff that didn't require replies. "You got the umbrella?" Sweet Kyle tried again, urgent whisper now, like he'd sat upright in bed. "Jess, are you safe? Do I need to call someone?" I watched the dark line of the door, counted to 5, then 10, then said, "You're in socks. Don't step in the puddle." "Hang on." I reached over and flicked my headlights from low to high and back, a quick flash against the building. If someone was standing just inside my place, they'd get that sweep of light across the floor. I waited. Still nothing. My brain was trying to branch into 8 directions. Call 911, call the landlord, bang on the upstairs neighbor's door, leave and park down the block, sit there all night. while my mouth kept running with the act because committing to one thing felt safer than switching midstream. "Yeah, I see you," I said, loud and cheerful, staring at the darkness. The rain quieted for a second, like it thinned, and I heard something inside again, a soft scrape. Not loud, not a mouse either. I gripped the phone tighter and raised my voice one more notch, making sure the words carried up the metal steps. "Kyle, I'm coming up now. You at the door?" Kyle was whispering what was going on, but I ignored him. Right then, I heard a crash inside, like a chair scraped and fell, and quick footsteps, hurried, clumsy, like he'd snagged on something. A couple seconds later, my door flew all the way open, and a figure in a dark hoodie burst out, hood up, head down. Tall, skinny. He didn't look at me, didn't even glance toward the lot. He bolted up the stairs past my landing, not toward the parking side but the other direction, where there's an access cutout to the neighboring roof if you hop the rail. He vaulted the railing, landed hard, and vanished into that narrow gap between buildings. I sat frozen in the driver's seat with the phone still to my ear and Kyle yelling, "Jessica, what's happening? Are you okay?" I took one breath, got my thumbs to work, dialed 911, and told the operator flat, "Break-in. Unknown male fled. I'm in my car with the doors locked. I'm safe." She told me not to enter. Keep visual if I could. Hazards on. Wait for the patrol. I repeated it back because that helped. Don't go in. Wait. I watched my open door, watched for movement and kept saying "yes, ma'am," while Kyle was asking if I wanted him to call his dad, retired firefighter, wrong jurisdiction, and I told him no, stay on, don't hang up. I gave cross streets, described the hoodie, said he went toward the roof gap. The operator asked about weapons. I hadn't seen any, and if I could see anyone else? No. It was all rain and a black rectangle where my life was supposed to be. The cops rolled up in 8 minutes, lights only, no siren, 2 units boxing the alley. 2 officers did a quick clear on the stairwell and the landings while a third stood by my bumper asking me to repeat it all. They went into my place, guns out, flashlights slicing around. I stayed by the car like I was told. After a minute, one officer called out, "Clear," and waved me to the foot of the stairs but said, "Don't touch anything." Inside, nobody. The bathroom window was wide open, latch turned, screen propped against the wall like someone set it there on purpose. I never open that window, ever, 'cause it faces the gap and the hinges squeal. And I said so, and the officer jotted it. Nothing obvious was missing. My wallet was still wedged in my tote. My laptop was still under the futon. No drawers dumped out. The only thing out of place was a chair tipped over by the table. They checked the sill and said there was damp grit and partial shoe marks on the tile like someone stepped from the tub area. One officer leaned out the bathroom window and looked at the drainage pipe that runs down the brick. He said you could climb it if you were dumb enough and desperate enough. Another officer asked if I knew anyone who'd have a key. No. And if there were issues with X's? No. They dusted the latch and the knob, bagged the screen. They said a detective would be in touch and to stay somewhere else tonight if I could. I went to my friend Amber's couch because I wasn't going to test my luck. The next day, detectives canvassed the building and the block. Turned out the guy upstairs, mid-20s, I'd never seen him, matched what little I'd seen. Multiple neighbors had seen him in that exact hoodie, and one guy smoking out back saw someone jump from our roof area around the same time. Midday, they picked the upstairs guy up on a warrant check after he came outside to argue with the landlord about noise. Apparently, he did that a lot. At the station, according to the detective, he started rambling about needing to get his property back, something that fell through the ventilation into my unit. There is no shared ventilation like that. The detective said he was off, maybe high, maybe both. They held him a few days, then released him on his own recognizance because he hadn't taken anything and hadn't laid hands on anyone. and the bathroom window latch was old and didn't show clean pry damage. The DA would review, but it was all technical. I asked about a restraining order, and they gave me the process and a pamphlet. I changed my locks that afternoon anyway, and put a cheap bar on the door. A week later, I boxed my stuff and moved out without waiting for the end of the month. Lost the deposit, didn't care. I don't rent first floors anymore, and I always add a second deadbolt. In late August of 2011, when I was just 13 years old, my family went to this big folk arts festival in Asheville for 3 days. We were staying at a motel right next to the convention center where everything was happening, and we spent our days watching craftspeople work, buying handmade stuff, and trying all the local food vendors. On the second evening, I talked my parents into letting me see this free folk theater show in a huge tent on the festival grounds while they took my little brother back to rest at the motel. The tent was only like a 5-minute walk away, so they agreed I could come straight back after the performance ended around 9. I watched the whole show and started heading out with everyone else, but halfway to the exit I realized I'd left my sweater on the wooden bench. I turned back into the mostly empty tent, found my sweater right where I'd left it, and went to leave through the same door I'd come in. When I pulled on the handle, it didn't budge, and I realized someone had already locked it from the outside. I tried knocking and calling out, "Hey, hello, still in here?" But all I heard was the distant clatter of someone rolling something across pavement, and then nothing. I stood there for a second, listening, and decided I'd just find another way out because it was a festival, not a prison. I wasn't too worried at first because the tent was massive and I'd seen all the actors leaving toward the back, which meant there had to be some kind of staff exit in that direction. I cut across the rows, stepped onto the low stage, and went behind the curtain, where it got quiet and echoey, and I threaded my way between set pieces, costume racks, and boxes of props under these dim work lights. At the very back, I found this narrow gap between stacked crates that led to a metal door with a sign that said, "Staff Exit," and I pushed it open expecting to see the parking lot. Instead, I stepped into this long concrete hallway that looked like it belonged in a warehouse, with just one flickering bulb way down at the end. I walked to the end and found a wooden door that opened into what was clearly a storage room, filled with metal shelves, rolled up carpets, broken chairs, and random junk. My phone had died earlier in the day, so I couldn't call my parents, and I was starting to panic because this definitely wasn't a public area and I had no idea how to get out. I tried to go back the way I came, but when I pulled on the corridor door, I realized it had locked automatically behind me and only opened from the hallway side. I tested another door, just a dark closet full of cables, and then stood still long enough to hear faint voices somewhere to my left. I told myself to just keep moving toward people, keep it simple, don't cry, don't make it worse. The storage room had 3 different doorways, and I picked the one where I could hear faint voices echoing, thinking it would lead me to people who could help me find my way out. I went through a couple of rooms filled with old festival equipment and electrical stuff, until I heard footsteps getting closer. This woman came around a corner wearing a denim jumpsuit and an orange construction hard hat, carrying a tablet like she was doing some kind of inspection. I felt this huge wave of relief and quickly explained that I'd gotten lost trying to leave after the theater show. She frowned and asked how I'd even managed to get back here because this entire section of the building had been closed off for renovations for the past 3 months. I apologized and said the tent's front door was locked and I took the staff exit. She nodded like that made sense and said, "Okay, there's a shortcut. I'll get you outside," and turned to lead the way. I followed because I wanted out, and also because those voices I'd heard were fading the other direction, and I wasn't trying to wander deeper alone. We cut through another storage bay, over a rubber cable strip that crunched under my sneakers, and into a darker corridor that sloped a little, away from the festival noise. I kept up, hugging my sweater, and said, "My parents are at the motel right next door, just to put that out there." And she said, "Cool, we'll get you there," in this flat tone. We walked past a yellow folding sign on the floor that said, "Wet paint," and she stepped around it without looking down. And that's when something felt off, because she wasn't actually looking at the tablet in her hands, and she kept glancing around nervously, like she was checking to see if anyone was watching us. We went down this narrow concrete staircase to a lower level where it was completely dark, and she pulled a flashlight out of her jumpsuit pocket, even though she'd supposedly just been walking by randomly when she found me. I said, "Are we for sure going the right way to the exit?" And she snapped, "Yes, it's right through the old loading area," voice sharp like I was annoying her. The beam kept swinging ahead and I followed because I didn't know the layout, and the steps echoed weird, and I could feel the festival sounds vanish above us. We walked maybe 30 more feet, and the corridor just dead-ended at a concrete wall with trash and busted pallets shoved into the corner. No roll-up door, no push bar, nothing. She stopped and said real calm, "Must have taken a wrong turn." But there was no surprise in her face, just this blank focus, like she was timing something. My dad had always said, "Trust your gut if anything feels off," and everything in me was going off like an alarm. I took one step back and she reached, resting her hand on my shoulder like she was guiding me. Then her fingers tightened, and I realized she wasn't guiding. She was holding. I opened my mouth and screamed as loud as I could, just straight, "Help! Someone help me! Hey!" And she hissed, "Shut up," and squeezed harder. I twisted my body the way we did in PE when someone tries to grab your wrist. Turn toward the thumb, drop your weight, and I slipped free, stumbled into the pile of pallets, scraped my shin, kept screaming. She came at me fast, flashlight beam jerking, and I grabbed the edge of a busted crate and yanked it between us. More noise, wood skidding across concrete. She said, "Stop it, kid," in this low voice like she was mad now, not scared, and she flicked the light off for a second like she thought the dark would shut me up. It didn't. I yelled that my parents were right outside, that people knew where I was, and that I was calling security, even though my phone was dead, just saying it to fill the space and make it sound official. I threw my sweater in her face, stupid, but it made her flinch, and I ran 2 steps toward the stairs and then back because I didn't want her behind me on the steps. I wanted witnesses, anyone, so I planted myself and screamed again, louder, throat raw, over and over. Maybe a minute passed. I don't know, it felt longer. And then heavy footsteps pounded from above, and 2 guys in work coveralls came down the stairs with big flashlights. They froze when the lights hit us. Me pressed against broken pallets, her standing there with her hard hat and that blank look. One guy said, "What the hell's going on?" And his beam dropped to my scraped leg. She dropped her hand from me like it burned and her whole tone changed. She started talking in that smooth, helpful way, saying she'd found me wandering in a restricted zone and she was escorting me out, real by the book. I said she'd taken me to a dead end. There was no exit, and both guys looked past her at the wall and the trash, and then at each other. The older guy, gray at the temples, name stitched on his chest, but I didn't read it right, stepped between us and said to me, "Let's get you to security, okay?" His hand hovered near my shoulder like he wanted permission. I nodded, and he put it there lightly and turned me toward the stairs. The other guy stayed with the woman and said he'd walk her to the foreman's office, and I heard him ask her name and she said something too quiet for me to catch. Up top, the sound of the festival came back like a normal world turning on. The older guy walked me fast through 2 service doors and into a little office with a desk, a radio, and a corkboard. He got a female security guard who sat me down and asked for my parents' names and the motel. They radioed a runner, and 5 minutes later my parents rushed in. I started crying finally and told them everything. Just the facts, the dead end, Her hand, the way she turned off the light. Security took a brief statement, wrote time and place, and said they'd check with the construction contractor. We went back to the motel, and I couldn't sleep even with the TV on. In the morning, my parents went to the festival office to ask what happened, and they said the construction crew were outside contractors, and they couldn't give out employee information. They'd look into it. That was it. To this day, I have no idea who that woman really was, why she had a hard hat and flashlight ready, or what she was planning to do with me in that dark basement dead end where nobody would have heard me scream. When I heard the metallic scrape of the roof hatch opening from inside, I knew someone had been in my camper while I slept. That sound was impossible. I was alone on this construction site, 50 miles from the nearest town, and I always locked that emergency hatch from the inside. But let me go back to the beginning of that Wednesday evening. I'd been on site for 8 months, overseeing a private residence for a client who wanted every detail perfect. To dodge the commute, I rented a small camper and parked it behind the chain-link fence. The crew left at 4 instead of 6, so I finished the day's foundation notes early, heated a can of soup on the camp stove, answered a couple stiff emails, double-checked the padlock on the gate, and turned in around 10. The nearest neighbors were half a mile away through the trees, and the generator was off. So yeah, quiet. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand the layout because it mattered. My bed sits under the roof hatch. To my left, there's a narrow shelf with rolled drawings, field notebooks, and a clear pouch with petty cash and receipts. Opposite the bed is a tiny counter with a kettle, a ceramic dish for spare keys, and a charging cable for my phone. My steel toe boots live by the door. A headlamp hangs from a hook above the shelf, and a cheap hammer rides in the toolbox under the bed slats. It's all within reach, which is great when you're tired. Not so great when someone else is reaching. I slept maybe 4 hours, out cold from the day. Something pulled me awake like a hook under my ribs. I was on my right side facing the wall, one arm under the pillow. I told myself it was the wind against the hatch I sometimes crack when it's muggy. Except the wind doesn't unzip zippers. There was a careful, deliberate sound behind me. A folder lifted and put back. The soft tap of plastic against wood. Someone was going through my things on the shelves 10 feet from my back. My throat went dry. I didn't roll over. I kept my breathing slow and even. I'd watched some dumb clip about that, and now I was committing. Papers slid. A pencil rolled off and kissed the floor. The dish with my keys scraped once, tiny ceramic on laminate. Whoever it was moved like they'd practiced this. No muttering, no rush, just a steady rhythm of hands. The calmness of it was the worst part. My phone sat on the counter a foot from their hand. If I reached, I'd make a sound. There was no way to dial with them right there. I ran through options like I do when a client says, "We need a miracle by Monday." The toolbox latch under me is metal and loud. The hammer would take 2 moves to grab. The door at my feet was dead bolted. I'd have to shimmy past them to get out. The windows are tiny sliders, and pushing through would rattle the frame. So I did the only thing that made sense. I played asleep and hoped they wanted cash or keys, not a fight. Dumb plan? Maybe. It was still the best one I had. A zipper whispered. My tote opened. The shelf flexed under weight. The floor squeaked. Campers do that under a body. The clear pouch slid free with that sticky plastic sound and paused in the air. Coins chimed. Just a couple. The ceramic scrape again, softer this time. Keys. My spare truck fob was in that dish. My jaw started to lock, and I forced it loose because even clenching felt loud. I thought about the site. The padlocked container with tools, the generator trailer, the gate. Whoever got inside the fence after hours had either tailed the crew or knew the schedule. Maybe they watched me lock up. I tried to replay the walk from the slab to the camper, the dirt road by the tree line, and came up with nothing useful. I stayed still. I didn't give them any reason to pivot from looking to fixing a witness. Time stretched until my ears rang. The rustling stopped. The camper settled enough that I could hear the kettle ping as it cooled. It was so quiet that my own breathing sounded fake. Then a soft creak, like a knee finding the floor, and whoever it was stood up. Fabric shifted. A careful footfall pressed the aisle. The air changed as they came closer to my bed. Warmth hit the back of my neck. Breath. Human. Right there. Fingers hovered near my shoulder, not touching, like they were testing for a flinch. I kept the sleep breath rhythm. In 2, out 2, and counted to 20, then to 30, then to 30 again because counting didn't help. Nothing touched me. They just stood there and breathed and weighed the risk. My arm under the pillow went numb, which was good because numb doesn't twitch. Those seconds were an hour. A belt buckle clicked against the counter, stupidly normal detail. And then the headlamp brushed the wall with a little plasticky tap. The warmth at my neck stepped back. One foot slid, then the other, toe to heel. The kind of quiet you get from practice or nerves or both. The aisle creaked once, tiny. The next sound was above me. The hatch frame took weight with a muted flex. Rubber dragged on metal, shoe sole over the lip. I didn't move. One last exhale grazed my hair and disappeared into the dark. Then the faint metallic slide of the cover, and after it, the same grit-on-metal scraping I'd heard at the start. Someone climbing back through the ceiling hatch. I stayed frozen for another 10 minutes, trying not to breathe too loud, telling myself if it was a trap, then moving would be the dumbest thing I could do. Finally, I rolled onto my back slow enough to make no noise, reached for the switch above the headboard, and clicked the ceiling light. The camper was empty. The emergency hatch over my bed sat a thumb-width open. The little interior latch I always set before sleeping was bent at a bad angle. Not popped by accident, but torqued. The gasket had fresh scuffs. Whoever came in had levered the lock from outside, probably with a flat bar, and used the built-in ladder rungs to come down into the aisle like they've done that before. I stood up too fast and felt my knees wobble, so I grabbed the counter and did inventory. No drama, just facts. My laptop bag was gone from the hook by the shelf. The tablet I kept charging on the counter was gone. The portable hard drive I clipped to the inside wall of the cabinet was gone, clip still there, drive missing. My document tote was missing from under the bench. That one hurt because it had signed contracts, spec sheets, site logistics, and a handwritten card with the corporate cloud access codes I used in bad service zones. Everything else sat exactly where I left it. Wallet with cash still in the cup holder. Phone still on the counter. Headlamp on its hook. Boots by the door. Kettle on the cold burner. I checked the hatch again and lifted the screen to look at the roof. A faint smear of dirt and a single shoe print on the metal. Nothing dramatic. I shut the hatch, forced the bent latch home, and shoved the toolbox under it just in case. Then I locked the door and called 911 with a steady voice I had to fake. They said a patrol was en route, but it could take an hour or more out here. I sat on the floor with my back to the cabinet, hammer across my thighs, and stared at the door seam like it could move. Every noise outside sounded like feet, even the trees popping as they cooled. I stayed put. The cruiser rolled up after 1 in the morning. Doors opened, 2 flashlights cut through the fence. "Ma'am?" a male voice called, and I answered through the door before unlocking it. They cleared the interior with a quick look, then went methodically. One photographed the bent latch and the marks on the hatch frame. The other took a list while I pointed at empty spots. They dusted the counter and the shelf anyway, more for process than hope, and stepped outside when I mentioned the roof entry. We followed their beams around the camper and across the scraped dirt to the far fence. About 20 yards down from the gate, they found the cut wire mesh, not torn, not sloppy, but clipped clean and folded back. On the ground beneath, clear footprints where somebody had crouched, the tread showing tight parallel lines. One officer measured the gap and said, almost to himself, "Knew what they wanted, came light, in and out." They swung their lights toward the tree line but didn't go in. It was black and steep, and that wasn't going to turn up anything at night. Back at the camper, he asked about who knew our schedule, who had access to drawings, whether the client had enemies. I gave the short list. Vendors, 2 spurned bidders, the neighbor who hated trucks. He said, "Look, I'm not saying this is movies, but blueprints for a place like this. It happens." And his partner nodded and wrote, "Possible industrial" on the report. Their working idea was simple. Somebody wanted copies, either to undercut or to plan something later. They filed the case number, told me to change all access and call IT first thing, and warned me to stay somewhere with other people until I could secure the camper. Then they left. 3 days later, Monday morning, I got an email to my work address with a subject line that was just the project name. No sender name I recognized, no body text, just a secure file link. I opened it on a company machine with IT on the phone because I'm not an idiot, and the folder contained every blueprint and spec we lost. Unchanged names, organized the same, versions through last week, nothing else. No ransom note, no demand, no signature. The laptop and tablet never turned up. The drives on them were encrypted, but still, gone. The data was back. I changed every password, we reissued codes, the client paid for a security review, and I moved to a motel 15 minutes down the highway and checked in under my initials. I still think about how close they were, the inch of air over my neck, the way they skipped the cash and took only the brains of the job, and then quietly gave it back. And I don't know if that was conscience or strategy, or just a message that they could walk in again if they wanted, but either way I decided I'm never sleeping alone on a site again. It happened when I was 16. I was studying at a private boarding school in New England. Third period chem on a Tuesday is as average as it gets. Fluorescent lights, the hum of the fume hood, Mr. Harris doing his dry, covalent bonds are friendships joke again. I felt that sudden bathroom need that hits out of nowhere, raised my hand, he nodded like he always did, and I grabbed the hall pass. The hallway outside was that echoey empty that schools get during class. Old wood floors, glass trophy cases, the long corridor that runs past the library and the stairwell down to the main office. We were in this half-renovation phase because the gym roof had leaked the month before, and some construction company had guys around all week. That's why I didn't think twice when I saw the guy with the camera at the far end by the big window. He had one of those tight polo shirts with a little triangle logo on the chest, looked corporate, and a lanyard with a plastic sleeve I couldn't read from where I was. He was taking photos out the window like 100 in a row, machine gun shutter, and when I walked by, I gave him a nod. He turned, smiled, not overdoing it, just kept shooting. I figured, okay, contractor guy, maybe insurance wants progress pics or whatever, and I kept moving. I went into the second floor boys' bathroom, did what I needed to do, washed my hands fast, paper towel, in and out. It couldn't have been 2 minutes because I didn't even bother checking the mirror. My hair was already a lost cause. And when I stepped back into the hallway, that guy was still there. Only he wasn't aiming at the window anymore. He had the camera tilted down and was zoomed in on his live view, and on that tiny screen I saw the first-floor principal's office door, the glass panel with the gold letters, perfectly framed from above, like he'd found that angle before. It pinged something in my head because, why photograph a door? And from here? I didn't ask, because I was 16 and you mind your own business, right? And I started back toward Chem. I was halfway when the PA crackled, and Mrs. Brandt's voice came on. Not her usual sing-song either. "Attention, all students and staff, immediately. Proceed to the nearest classroom and lock the doors. This is not a drill." I stopped dead, then turned to double-time it back to Mr. Harris, and that's when I saw the camera guy coming my way fast, the lanyard swinging, his smile gone. He said, "Hey kid, come on, hurry up." And he gestured like he owned the hall. I froze because the tone wasn't right. It wasn't calming, it was rushed and sharp, like he was late for something and I was in his way. He closed the distance quick, that camera still in his hand, and did this half-crouch like he was about to shepherd me. "This way," he said, pointing past me toward the back stairwell. "Let's go." He ran up closer and said he was from the security company, taking me to a safe place. I knew all three of our guards, Bill with the beard, Kenny who always smelled like mints, and Ms. Alvarez who ran drills like we were the Marines, and this guy wasn't one of them. Also, security guys don't carry DSLRs around during a lockdown. "I'm going back to my class," I said, already angling to slip past him. He reached out and clamped a hand on my shoulder, thumb digging under my collarbone in that firm way adults sometimes do when they're trying to move you without making a scene, and said, "No, with me, quickly." His grip was strong enough that I felt it in my teeth, and my stomach did that drop because none of this matched the script we'd been taught since 7th grade. I twisted hard the way our wrestling coach taught us in PE, hand over, step through, shoulder roll, thank you Coach Nolan, and the guy's fingers slid off my shirt. I bolted, full sprint, sneakers thudding, backpack slapping my spine, and he came after me immediately. "Stop!" he yelled. "I'm trying to help you!" He was breathing hard and fast, the camera banging against his hip on its strap, and I didn't look back again because I didn't need to. I could hear how close he was. The hall felt twice as long as before. I counted doors, storage room, Latin, faculty, and cut left at the water fountain toward Chem. The PA repeated the message, "This is not a drill," and a door somewhere ahead clicked shut. I hit the chemistry door with my palm, pounding, "It's me! It's me!" and yelled, "Mr. Harris!" Because we get taught not to say names, but saying his name felt faster than anything else. Behind me, the guy's footsteps stuttered like he tried to slow down, like he didn't want whoever opened the door to see him right on me. "Open!" I shouted, slamming the metal with the side of my fist until my knuckles stung. I heard the lock turn. The door cracked an inch, chain on, and Mr. Harris's eye flashed through. "ID," he said automatically, the way he was trained, and I shoved my card at the gap with my shaking hand. The footsteps behind me closed in, and I felt more than saw the camera guy raising his free hand like he was going to lay it on me again, and I blurted, "He's not security," because I needed that out of my mouth fast. Mr. Harris unhooked the chain in one motion, yanked the door wide, grabbed a fistful of my sleeve, and hauled me in. Mr. Harris opened the door, pulled me inside, and immediately closed it. He stopped a few yards from the door like he was listening, 10 seconds tops, then turned and ran the other way. Mr. Harris slid the deadbolt, killed the lights, grabbed the wall phone, and said, "Security, Harris in Chem. Student pursued by unknown adult male, claiming security. Request immediate response." Everyone stayed under the benches like we practiced. I pressed against the cabinet and gave him the fast details. Polo with a triangle logo, blank lanyard sleeve, camera in his hand, late 20s or early 30s, average height. We waited. Footsteps thudded, radios crackled, a door slammed somewhere below. Harris braced the door with the rolling table and said, "Nobody opens for any reason." A freshman cried until someone shushed him. The clock hand crawled. About 20 minutes later, the PA chimed and Mrs. Brandt said, "Lockdown is lifted. Remain in your current room until contacted by security." Harris still held the bolt. Then the coded knock from drills, and Ms. Alvarez called, "Open for security." He peeked, then let her and Kenny in. She asked who saw the man. Harris pointed at me. I stood and ran through it clean. She stopped me at the logo. Triangle? I traced it in the air. "Our contractor uses a diamond," she told Kenny, who was already at the window. She radioed. Male outsider, early 30s, camera, false pretense, student contact, no injury, description to follow. Then she told us to hold for an escort. They moved us by sections to the auditorium, doors opening and closing in sequence. While we walked, Ms. Alvarez gave the short version. An outsider entered through the main office saying he was a newspaper photographer. The secretary believed him because he had a camera and a lanyard. The principal came back, checked the schedule, saw no interview booked, and called the lockdown. Security started a sweep, but he took an emergency exit on the science wing and was gone by the time they hit the stairwell. In the auditorium, we sat by homeroom while security took statements. When it was my turn, I repeated the description and added the lens was long, like a zoom, and the strap had white letters. Ms. Alvarez said for everyone to hear that the secretary saw him set down a black messenger bag and printed maps of the building with some areas highlighted when he signed in. "Camera, bag, and maps are with him," she said. He left through the emergency exit. After that, they released us by classrooms and told teachers to hold students until the final sweep. By last bell, they still had not found him. A rumor said a backlot camera caught him pushing the exit bar and cutting to the street. They did not show us the clip, just told us to avoid side doors and wait for dorm staff. What he was planning stayed unclear. I got told I did the right thing by not going with him, and the school tightened access after. Door alarms, stricter sign-in, no exceptions. What sticks with me is what he photographed. The principal's door, windows, empty hallways at fixed angles. It felt like reconnaissance, checking lines of sight and timings, and we cut it off. Police later said he might have been casing the school for a robbery or worse, and they never caught him. I replay the choice. If I had trusted him and followed, where would he have taken me? And what was in that bag besides the camera? I graduated 2 years later and still wonder who he was and what he wanted. So, when I was planning our Michigan trip last July, I thought it'd be nice to mix things up. My wife Sandra, our daughter Emily, who's 16, our son Josh, who's 14, and me, we'd been doing the same RV campground routine every summer for years. This time I suggested we try wild camping on the shore of Lake Superior, just for one night. You know, get that authentic outdoor experience. The first 4 nights we stayed at regular campgrounds with showers and electricity, totally normal family vacation stuff. But on day 5, we drove up the coast and found this sandy beach area away from the tourist spots. It was beautiful. Clear water, scattered driftwood, thick pine trees behind us. We set up 2 tents, built a fire pit with rocks from the beach, the whole 9 yards. I staked the bigger tent for me and Sandra where the sand met the tree line, less wind, and the kids' little dome went 15 feet closer to the water so they could fall asleep to waves, which Emily said like it was a commercial. I kept the car pulled in nose out on a firm patch of sand because it just felt smarter that way. We cooked hot dogs, argued about who burned the first marshmallow, and I showed Josh how to stack a log cabin fire so it wouldn't collapse. Nothing fancy, just us, that big lake, and a sky that looked wider than usual. Still, I kept glancing at the tree line like I was waiting for something I couldn't name. Everything seemed fine until I came back from the car with extra tent stakes and noticed things had moved. Our folding chair was on the opposite side of the fire ring from where I'd left it. I was sure I'd placed it on the right side, but now it was on the left. The cooler was open, though Sandra swore she'd locked it. I figured we were both tired from driving, maybe misremembering. The kids had been down at the water skipping stones, and when I called them back because it was getting dark, Emily wanted to walk along the beach before bed. I told everyone to stay within sight of the fire. Couldn't really explain why I felt uneasy. She rolled her eyes, said, "We're not 5," but she stayed close. Josh kept asking if raccoons came out on beaches, and I said maybe, which sounded thin even to me. We ate late, cleaned up well, buried the embers under a layer of sand like I'd taught them since they were small. Around midnight, I woke up to scratching sounds outside our tent, coming from the side away from where the kids were sleeping. Sandra heard it too, both of us lying there frozen, listening. It wasn't frantic, more like deliberate, like someone testing something. I whispered, "Probably a fox." And even as I said it, I pictured hands instead of paws. Sandra whispered back, "Do you smell anything?" And I didn't. No skunk, no trash rot, just cold lake air and our nylon breath. I looked through the mesh window but couldn't see anything in the darkness. The fire had burned down to barely glowing embers, even though we'd buried them properly under sand. Our marshmallow roasting stick was stuck upright in the sand about 3 feet from where it had been lying flat. Something wasn't right. I whispered through the tent wall to wake Emily and Josh, asked if either of them had gone outside. They both answered groggily, annoyed that I was bothering them, said no, and to let them sleep. The scratching had stopped, but now I was wide awake, staring at the tent ceiling, trying to convince myself it was just an animal. Sandra grabbed my hand and squeezed it. She was scared too, I could tell. When Josh went down to the lake to wash his face in the morning, he came running back, face pale, telling me I needed to see something. On the wet sand near the water line, about 60 feet from our tents, there was a clear trail of barefoot prints, adult-sized, maybe size 11 or 12. The prints came from the brush, made a complete circle around both our tents, and returned to the woods. Between some of the footprints were round indentations, like someone had been squatting down periodically, staying low. I took photos with my phone without knowing why, just that I didn't want to rely on memory. Sandra was already stuffing sleeping bags into their sacks, movements quick and jerky, not wasting words. The kids picked up on the tension, stopped asking what the plan was, just watched our faces and moved faster. I walked the loop again to be sure it wasn't wind or water, but the toes and arches were crisp, and one heel had pressed against a pebble hard enough to leave a crescent. Whoever it was had knelt where our chair got moved, and outside the wall where we'd heard scratching, which turned my unease into action. I followed the trail with Josh, while Sandra broke down the kids' tent, and Emily rolled pads tight with those rubber straps. Up close, the toes dug in like someone trying to stay quiet, and the stride didn't wander. There was a spot where the prints angled right up to the kids' tent, 2 round knee marks beside them. Then they resumed toward the fire ring. Josh said, "Is this a prank?" And I said, "Not funny if it is," because I couldn't sell a softer answer. I checked the cooler latch, and there was damp sand ground into it like wet hands had tried it after we'd turned in. The roasting stick was still upright where I'd seen it, and smaller toe marks fanned around it like somebody had been crouched there. I told Josh to help his sister, took a few wider shots that showed the loop out of the brush and back in, and said, "We're packing and we're leaving." Now, before I explain what happened next, You need to understand how fast you go from vacation to evacuation when your family is exposed on an empty beach. I ran a checklist I didn't know I had. Food sealed, knife accessible, keys in my pocket, phone at 60% with 1 bar, spare key stuck in the magnet box under the driver door. The car was already pulled in nose out, so it was gear in, kids in, go. Sandra didn't argue about breakfast or one last swim. She said, "Tell me what you need," and did it. Tents down, sand shaken, steaks in the bin, fire ring kicked flat so no one blamed us for a hot bed. And all of it took minutes because no one wasted movements. I kept scanning the brush for that off-color shape that would be a person crouched there, but the tree line stayed a wall. We didn't run, but we moved like people who know being quick matters. We packed in silence and loaded the car in record time. Only when we were pulling out did Emily speak from the back seat, voice small. She said last night she'd thought someone was standing next to her tent, breathing slow and heavy, but she assumed it was me checking on them. She'd been too tired to get up and look. I said, "That wasn't me." And it sat in the car while the tires bumped over ruts, and Josh muttered, "So who was it?" Like he already knew. I kept my eyes on the narrow track through the trees, eased over a route that could have high-centered us, then pushed the speed a little once we hit the county road because I wanted distance. Sandra held her phone in her lap like she was ready to dial if I told her to. We spent the rest of the week at a busy campground with security lights and a resident manager. The kids didn't fight it. They stayed close, slept with shoes by the door, didn't wander. I replaced the cooler latch, added a cheap motion chime to the tent zipper, kept the car keys on a lanyard around my neck. I never showed those footprint photos to anyone except Sandra. Never filed a report. Never told the kids how serious it could have been because I didn't want that night welded into their heads. Sometimes I wonder what that person wanted, watching us, circling, kneeling, whether they were waiting for an unlocked zipper or a voice to answer back, and why they spent hours pacing our tents instead of just leaving. About a year ago now, me and my partner Jeremy got sent to check out an illegal tap on one of our power lines in the old industrial park, where a bunch of warehouses sat empty after the logistics company went bankrupt. This was pretty routine work for us. We'd been partners for 3 years, and these calls usually turned out to be illegal Bitcoin mining operations or unlicensed workshops stealing electricity to save money. We got there around 2:30 in the afternoon. Found the problem spot pretty quick. Someone had professionally spliced into our line and run a cable to warehouse number 7, which according to our records should have been completely empty. The door to the warehouse was unlocked, so we walked in with our flashlights and voltage testers, ready to document the violation and shut it down. The main space was full of old shelving units covered in dusty boxes, but in the far corner, there was a light bulb burning, powered by an extension cord running from our stolen electricity. Jeremy went to find the breaker box to kill the power, while I followed the cord to see what exactly was drawing current from our grid. Behind a wall of shelves, I found this area that had been sectioned off with plywood sheets, and inside were 2 folding tables covered in electronics, computers, printers, laminating machines, professional-grade stuff. On one table, there were stacks of plastic cards, driver's licenses, credit cards, student IDs, all with different photos and names, and I picked one up and realized immediately they were high-quality fakes. The other table had laptops open with dozens of browser tabs, bank accounts, darknet forums, spreadsheets with names and addresses. It was clearly some kind of identity theft operation running out of this warehouse. I called out for Jeremy to come see this, but then I heard a car door slam outside and an engine jump like somebody was in a hurry. I ran toward the sound and saw a silver sedan peeling out of the lot. and Jeremy was on the concrete by the breaker box holding his head. Someone had cracked him from behind with something heavy while he was working on the wiring. I got him up, sat him on a pallet, grabbed the first aid kit from our truck, and while I was cleaning the cut, he kept saying we needed to call the cops right now and show them everything. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand how our department is about scope and permissions. We can enter to address a hazard on our equipment, but if it turns into a general search, we start skating on thin ice. I had a mortgage, 2 kids, my wife on maternity leave, and my head just filled with worst-case scenarios, where some lawyer says we exceeded authority and the city throws us under the bus. I told Jeremy we could shut off the illegal tap, note everything we saw in our report, and let it land where it landed when the owner complained about the outage. He said, "They assaulted me, man. What scope are you talking about?" And he wasn't wrong. But I kept thinking, like, if we turn this into a big scene and we're the ones who broke into a tenant area without a cop, who gets hammered for it? He asked if I was seriously walking away from a fake ID factory. And I said I wasn't walking away, I was cutting their cord. Jeremy stared at me for a good 10 seconds with that stunned look, and then just said he didn't want to get fired either, which hurt to hear because it sounded like he thought I cared more about my job than his head. We went back in, and I snapped pictures of the splice and the extension run for our work order. Nothing inside the plywood room. And he pulled the main, and we traced the illegal feed and cut it clean at the tap, bagged the severed piece like we always do. We sealed the breaker box with our tag, locked the panel, stuck a red notice on the door that power was disconnected due to tampering, and we left without touching anything else. The drive back was dead quiet, just the sound of the ratchet strap vibrating in the back, and I kept rehearsing how I'd justify it if anyone asked. For the next few days, I told myself we did exactly what we were supposed to do. We protected the system, and the rest was police business, and that the owner would have to explain why an empty building had a bill and a cord running to a plywood office. Jeremy started switching shifts after that, swapping with other crews, which happens, but when we did see each other in the locker room, he barely said a word. I tried to ask how his head was, and he just said, "Fine," and then made some joke to another guy about helmets, and I knew what he meant by not saying it. 2 weeks later, I had a job nearby, and on the way back I swung through the park to see if there was a cruiser outside number 7 or any tape, just to calm my brain down. Instead of the warehouse, there was a flattened rectangle of rubble and twisted rebar behind new temporary fence, like somebody hit fast forward on a demo schedule. I pulled over, showed my city badge to the guy in a neon vest at the gate, and asked when they knocked it down because permitting a loan usually takes forever. He said they got emergency demolition approved due to structural failure in the load-bearing walls, and he pointed at a clipboard like that made it official. I said, "When was that submitted?" And he shrugged and said last week, and the excavator company was free, so they moved quick. I walked the fence line and looked through the slats at where our plywood room would have been. Just crushed concrete, no tables, no nothing. And I got this hollow feeling like we cut a vine and forgot about the roots. I asked the guard if the owner was around, and he said no, just him until the trucks hauled the rest to the landfill. And then he asked why I cared, and I told him we had an open work order. He nodded like he didn't, and I stood there for another minute watching a guy in a skid steer push bricks into a pile, and thinking about those cards with 100 names I didn't know. I could hear myself telling my wife that night that we did our job and nothing more, and hating how true it was. Driving away, I saw a new sign zip-tied to the fence that said, "Future Development, Contact for Leasing," and I almost laughed. I didn't call Jeremy because I knew exactly what he'd say, and I didn't have a counter. I kept my mouth shut at work, filed the final note that the illegal tap was de-energized and secured, and that was the end of our paperwork. Since then, every so often, a story pops up in the news about some poor college kid or older lady finding out their credit is wrecked by accounts opened in their name, and I can't help but picture those laptops with the spreadsheets. I know correlation isn't proof and all that, but I also know what a clean demolition does to evidence. When I drove past again a week after that, the lot was level, and a "for rent" banner was already hung, neat and tidy, like nothing ever happened there. I stopped and asked the security guard what happened. He said the owner had gotten emergency demolition approved because of structural failure in the load-bearing walls. That was bullshit. I'd been inside that building. It was solid. Could have stood for another 20 years easy. Someone with serious money and connections had moved fast to destroy the evidence, and I realized me and Jeremy had stumbled onto something bigger than just a few fake IDs. A month later, I saw a story about police investigating an identity theft ring. Hundreds here had their information stolen. I recognized some of the names from those spreadsheets I'd seen on the laptop in the warehouse, and that made my stomach drop in a way I couldn't talk around. If we had called the police that day, if we had stayed put and waited for a cruiser, they could have walked into a live scene with physical cards and machines and laptops logged in. Chain of custody clean. You know, the kind of case that makes itself. Instead, we cut a wire and left, and by the time anyone looked, the wire and the room were gone, and whoever ran that place had driven off with a trunk full of names while we were bandaging a head and debating policy. I kept replaying the sound of that sedan leaving and the look Jeremy gave me when I said we should just do our job and nothing else, and I kept thinking, how many people fit in those few seconds? I drove by the site again and there was nothing to see. Just a flat pad and a new lock on the fence, and I realized even if I went to the police, I had nothing they could use. No photos of the tables, no numbers, just my word and a cut cable bagged in our warehouse that proved someone stole power, not that they were running an operation. I called a buddy in inspections to ask how fast someone could push an emergency demo through, and he said, if a structural engineer signs off and someone nudges the right desks, it can happen before lunch. And I just said thanks and hung up and stared at my phone. I sent Jeremy a message that said we could still go in together and talk to a detective, that maybe our statements would matter, and he left it on read for 2 days and finally wrote back, "You do what you want," which told me everything. Jeremy quit 3 months later, didn't even say goodbye to me, and I know he never forgave me for that decision. HR sent one of those all-staff emails about wishing him luck in future endeavors, and I just stared at the screen like an idiot. I texted him a simple "you good," and the bubble stayed gray forever, which was an answer. Another crew guy said Jeremy moved out of state for family and took a utility job with better benefits, which sounded convenient and true at the same time. The thing that gets me is I see the faces on the news, people explaining how their savings vanished and their credit died and their phones will not stop ringing. I know some of those names were on the lists in that warehouse, and I could have prevented it if I had done the right thing instead of protecting myself. Jeremy and I never spoke again after he quit. He moved to another state, got a job with a different utility company, and I don't blame him for wanting nothing to do with me. I still work the same job, still respond to illegal hookup calls, but now every time I find something suspicious I call it in immediately. Doesn't matter if it makes me look paranoid or gets me in trouble for overstepping. I tell the dispatcher exactly what I saw. I get a case number. I wait for a badge before I even touch a panel. And if a property manager wants to yell, I let them, because they can take a number. I learned my lesson too late to help those people whose lives got destroyed. But at least now I know that some things are more important than keeping your head down and your job safe. The police never did catch the people running that operation. The case went cold after the warehouse was demolished. And somewhere out there those criminals are probably still stealing identities and ruining lives. Sometimes I draft an email to the detective listed in the article and attach the work order PDF and the timestamps. And then I delete it because it's nothing. It's not evidence. And I hate that I know the difference. And I have to live with knowing I could have stopped them but didn't, because I was too much of a coward to make one phone call when it would have actually mattered. It happened last summer when I moved into this old apartment on the outskirts of Portland with my friend Kira. I was working late shifts at a bar while finishing my master's in sociology, coming home exhausted around 2 a.m. most nights. My bedroom was at the end of a narrow hallway, and the door had this old brass knob with a heavy latch that took real effort to close properly. I always checked it twice before going to sleep, especially after those late shifts when I'd come home paranoid and worn out from dealing with drunk customers. One morning I woke up and found the door cracked open about 3 inches, even though I specifically remembered shutting it tight the night before. Kira said she hadn't been near my room, and I convinced myself the latch just hadn't caught properly, even though I knew that heavy mechanism didn't open by itself. The old building had drafty windows, so I blamed it on air pressure or settling foundations, anything to avoid the creeping feeling that something was wrong. But deep down, I knew that latch was too solid to pop open on its own. I tried to be logical. I replayed the night in my head, closing the door, the little lift and push it took to make the latch catch, the way my wrist felt it click. It's weird what your body remembers. I told myself maybe I'd been scrolling half asleep and got up for water and forgot. Which, okay, happens. But it bugged me that I never leave the door cracked because the hall light from the kitchen hits right in my face. Kira joked, "Your latch is dramatic," and I laughed, even though I didn't find it funny. I pressed the door shut that evening a little harder than usual and stood there listening for the thick metal drop. It sounded final. A week later it happened again, except worse. I'd gotten home from my shift around 2, locked the door, heard the distinctive click of the latch catching. Woke up at 7 to my alarm and the door was wide open, not just cracked, but fully open like someone had walked through and left it that way. My work bag, which I'd left on a chair in the corner, was now on the floor by the doorway. In the bathroom, I found a wet towel, even though I hadn't showered since the evening before my shift. Little things stacked up in my head all at once. Bag moved, towel wet, door open, and the feeling shifted from weird to something's off. I confronted Kira, probably too aggressively. She got offended and went straight to her phone, pulled up the Ring camera for the front door. She scrolled through the timeline and showed me. Nobody had entered the apartment overnight, just us earlier in the evening. She said, "I'm not messing with you," and I believed her. But that didn't help, because then the only explanation was me. I started thinking about stress and sleep deprivation, the papers I had due, how my bar manager keeps cutting the bar back early, so I end up doing inventory alone at 1:30 a.m. Dumb little grind details that make you sloppy. I felt dumb and scared at the same time. I asked Kira if I'd ever sleepwalked before. She shrugged and said, "Not that I've seen." The thought of doing this stuff in my sleep made my stomach drop because, honestly, what are you supposed to do with that? You can add locks, but how do you lock out yourself? I ordered a cheap battery-powered camera online, $60, the kind that saves clips to a card, and when it arrived, I set it up in the corner of my room, angled at the door, because I needed to know what was happening during those missing hours. Now, before I explain what happened next, you need to understand the setup. I put a piece of tape on the floor where my bag was supposed to sit so I'd have a reference. I positioned the chair legs right against that tape. I checked the latch 5 times. Overkill, I know. I put my phone charger on the left side of the bed. Tiny routine things, just anchors. If the video said I stayed in bed, then I was going to a doctor. If it showed anything else, at least I'd have proof of whatever it was. The next night after a brutal shift, I came home completely drained. I'd started taking melatonin for insomnia caused by my weird schedule, and I popped one before closing my door and crashing hard. I remember thinking as I lay down, if I wake up and the chairs moved again, I'm done with night shifts. Then I was out. No dreams, no nothing. Just the dead kind of sleep where your body feels like a stone. When I woke up, the first thing I did was check the camera, and what I saw made my hands shake so badly, I almost dropped my phone. At 3:17 a.m., my door opened, but I was the one opening it. On the video, I stood up from bed with my eyes closed, walked smoothly to the door, turned the handle, and stepped into the hallway. No fumbling, no hesitation. I looked like I'd practiced. I was gone for 11 minutes. When I came back, I was carrying my work bag, went into the bathroom where I could hear water running, then returned to bed without closing the door. My movements were slow, mechanical, my face completely blank like nobody was home behind my eyes. The chair had been dragged, the tape marker now visible by inches, and I didn't even glance at it on the way back. I watched this recording 5 times, trying to remember even a second of it, but there was nothing. Just a black void where those 11 minutes should have been. It was like watching a stranger wearing my body, and the stranger was me. I showed Kira the footage and she freaked out, insisted I see a doctor immediately. My regular doc sent me to a sleep specialist who heard my schedule, grad school, late bar shifts, the move, and said it fit stress-induced somnambulism. Melatonin can make it worse sometimes, he said, and my sleeping brain was acting out daytime routines, grabbing my bag like work, washing up like morning, opening the door because I always do on bathroom trips. Your conscious mind is offline while your body runs tasks, he said. He switched my meds, told me to cut shifts, and had me add structure. Same bedtime, no screens, a door alarm to wake me. I did all of it because I needed this fixed. Kira helped build a checklist: lock, alarm armed, camera angle, bag on the tape mark, lights off, and I read it out loud before bed. At 3:11 a.m. the alarm screamed and I came to already at the door, hand on the brass knob, no memory. I logged the time and went back to bed. Next night, 4:06, same thing. I raised the sensor so it'd trip sooner. 2 nights later, the morning clip showed me sit up, pause, and lie back down. Therapy was practical. Identify triggers, plan around them. I dropped 2 shifts with a note from the specialist. My manager complained but did it. I stopped bringing my bag into the bedroom, shut the bathroom door, cranked the alarm volume. Still messed up once when the magnet wasn't seated. I woke on the bath mat with the shower barely running and my bag on the counter. I taped the magnet in place and added "Verify click" to the list. Kira kept her door cracked so she could hear the alarm and told me, "You're doing everything right, it's gonna taper." Over the next few weeks, the alarm caught me less, maybe once a week, and some nights not at all. I still watched every clip, fast-forwarding my blank face to be sure nothing else happened. It's been 4 months since that morning. I can feel it when I'm slipping now. Saturday doubles get swapped. Late emails wait. If I'm wired, I walk a loop around the block. Kira moved in with boyfriend, so it's just me and the checklist and the camera. I added a chime to the front door and left the ring linked. Most nights I say the list, hit the lights, and try to sleep. Some mornings the clip shows me roll and stop like my body remembered the alarm before it sounded. Other mornings I wake standing at the door with the siren drilling my ears and the knob cold in my hand. I cut out shift drinks. Caffeine after midnight is a no. The specialist says it'll probably disappear when grad school ends and I'm off nights. Until then, I keep the system tight. Weekly camera card swaps, fresh batteries, lock oiled so the latch catches the same every time. The real risk isn't a stranger, it's me doing what I've trained myself to do with nobody steering. I'm still not sure I can trust myself. The scariest thing isn't that someone else might hurt you. It's realizing you can't rely on your own mind to keep you safe, not even inside a room you triple-checked. Sometimes I wake at 3 a.m. and lie still testing reality. Name, date, one thing I did that day, 3 objects on the dresser. Wondering if I'm actually awake or if I'll watch the clip later and see my own face empty. That uncertainty is worse than any nightmare I've ever had.